Let's talk about the Boston Bruins with NESN's Kasey Hudson, shall we?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, July 22nd. Thank you so much for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today we have a very special episode. I'm going to be joined on the podcast by NESN host and reporter Kasey Hudson, who's been with NESN since January after spending about 8 years covering the Tampa Bay Lightning down in Florida. A lot of great hockey insights, and I'm excited to chat with her today about the Bruins offseason so far, impressions of Marco Sturm, how the Bruins fared at the draft, whether James Hagens should go back to BC, go pro. Whole bunch of topics we are going to discuss, and I'm excited to get into it. Before we get to that conversation, quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. That's on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Threads, TikTok. You can also find me, my hockey thoughts and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I've been covering this team and the NHL for various outlets for about 20 years now. Very excited to get into today's conversation with Kasey Hudson of NESN. So without further ado, let us get right to it. All right, I am so pleased to be joined today by NESN host and reporter Kasey Hudson. And let's just get right into it. Kasey, how are you today? Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Of course. Thanks for asking me to hop on. I'm doing good. We actually had a Hockey Hub episode yesterday, plenty to talk about. So that all feels better. And we're getting closer to hockey season finally being here.
Yes.
So can't complain.
Thank goodness. Yes. When people come on the podcast, I always like to ask them kind of their hockey origin stories. How did you get into the game? How did you become acquainted with hockey? What's your kind of story that led you to where you are today with the sport?
Yeah, funny enough, I actually grew up an Air Force military brat. So I moved around a lot. Every 8 to 10 months, we were off on a new adventure.
Oh, wow.
And when my dad finally got closer to retirement, we landed in a small town called Apopka, which is right outside of Orlando, Florida. And when we got there, the only sports that were going on were tennis. And my mom's business partners actually, their sons played hockey, their daughters figure skated. So at 6 years old, I got thrown on a pair of skates and sent to the RDV Sportsplex out in Apopka. And that's when I first kind of fell in love with the cold, the ice, and skating. I did it for 3 years in Apopka, figure skating, that is. And then my dad officially retired and we moved to Tampa in 2000. And as most people know, the Tampa Bay Lightning were kind of finding themselves because just 4 years later, they won a Stanley Cup. And that's really where my hockey fandom came into play because, you know, you're running around with a bunch of hockey players when you're a figure skater, but there's a little bit of that tension fighting for ice time and stuff. But then when I got there, I mean, we had Vincent LeCavier, we had, Brian Bradley was such a legend, one of the first all-stars there. We had a bruiser and Pavel Kabina. He was like one of the hardest hitting defensemen. So again, through my mom's business, we used to go to a lot of hockey games.
Oh, very cool.
It just really took off from there.
Awesome. Yeah, that team, I actually had a chance to interview Dave Andreychuk when he and Mark Recchi were elected to the Hall of Fame. And yeah, that team was so great. The lockout interrupted kind of that early dynasty for the Lightning, I guess. But what a team that was. Yeah, Brad Martis St. Louis, Brad Richards. What a great team that was.
Yeah.
And then I guess you covered the Tampa Bay Lightning before jumping up to NESN. That's right, yeah?
Absolutely. So I always knew I'd work in sports. I mean, as a military brat, kind of being involved in sports was a lifesaver. It helped me get acclimated everywhere we went. But I thought I was going to be on the public relations side or maybe legal. And then my parents ended up adopting a guy friend of mine who played football, actually became very outstanding at football. We had coaches across the country coming to recruit him. And when he went to his first freshman year at FSU, my guy friends were like, you have to see this college game day thing. And at that point I knew, okay, you can actually make a career of sports broadcasting and sports. So that's when I changed my major to become a sports broadcaster. At first I was working with a small media outlet where I covered all sports. I mean, basketball, baseball, football, hockey, NASCAR. NASCAR was pretty sick. And after a couple of years working with them, and being around the Lightning allowed me as an independent reporter to cover the team.
Oh, very cool.
And after 3 years of covering them as an independent reporter, I actually became their backup studio host alongside JP Peterson. So that was really cool because I started working in studio, doing intermission reports and analysis and just kind of being like the hype gal for pre and post game, which was super fun, and covered them for 7 seasons. So It was a long journey before getting to NESN.
Very cool. And that included the Stanley Cup years there, the later ones for the Lightning.
Yes, it did. Unfortunately, the bubble situation, but we had a great celebration when the guys came back. That's when we dubbed and claimed the boat parades and stuff.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so we were still able to celebrate full throttle, but it was pretty amazing. Our coverage style with them being in the bubble, you had to learn to be a lot more analytic because you only had so many resources to tie you to the team.
Right.
So different adjusting as a reporter on how to do that and kind of speak for guys who are kind of isolated up in Canada and stuff. So it was a cool experience.
Very cool. Yeah. I guess since you covered the Lightning, and this wasn't a question that I included on our list, but I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, so many Bruins fans have opinions about Brad Marchand being traded prior to the trade deadline, not getting as much as they would have liked for him, seeing him win a cup with the Florida Panthers. But it always makes me think of Steven Stamkos and the Tampa Bay Lightning and the fact that they just let him leave. And he went to the Nashville Predators as a free agent. So for Bruins and their fans, it's like, this isn't what happened with Marchand isn't an anomaly really. And the fact that they got anything for him instead of letting him walk is kind of even more than Tampa with Steven Stamkos. Do you have any thoughts on those kind of two situations and how they kind of relate?
Yeah, I think the relatability would be the toughest part about it is moving on from any player wearing the C on their chest. That is a notoriety that we didn't really see much in hockey. And we're seeing so many things change in hockey. I think that happening is like jaw-dropping because that's the face of your franchise no matter what's taking place. And what's synergistic between a Brad Marchand and a Steven Stamkos is they were still putting up numbers. And whenever the Tampa Bay Lightning were in a jam, Steven Stamkos was still able to rip it from the left circle. And the one-timer was still pretty consistent on the power play no matter how predictable it was. Somehow, some way he snuck it in the mix. And people thought 30 plus years old, he can't be physical. Now he could still be physical. He helped us keep it interesting versus the Panthers in the postseason last year. So I do understand that because when you still see so much hope and spark out of the face of your franchise, moving on from them makes it very obvious that change is coming. And then we don't know what to anticipate with change. And then hitting restart is really hard. And what I can imagine is that the Lightning were coming off of winning back-to-back Stanley Cups and then 3 Stanley Cup final appearances, and we were so close to going back. So you don't want change in that moment. And then place it on the Bruins. Well, you had the perfect season 2023. Then you kind of have this postseason where it's like you were right on the cusp, but you just need to make some small changes. And then now it feels like an implosion of the roster. So I think it's just the change that really freaks everyone out, the change of the guard, if you will. But I mean, you got to catch up to where the rest of the league is going. And when you have young teams, like, I hate to say it because I know Boston and Montreal, not friends, but when you see a young team like Montreal making waves, or Utah, Utah are going to be real competitors this year. You have to start leaning in the direction of change. And sometimes that means big moves from moving on from your captain.
Yeah, for sure. And the Bruins have had a lot of change so far this summer. I'd love to talk about the new coach, the draft, free agency, and we're going to touch on that all as the podcast continues. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. Look, you're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned on the beach. It's so easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. All you have to do is open the FanDuel app or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, continuing our conversation today with Kasey Hudson of NESN. I wanted to chat, I know I've kind of broken down what went wrong with the Bruins this past season, kind of ad nauseum, trying to look forward a bit more. So let's just put last season aside and look to the future. One of the big things the Bruins have done this offseason is hire a new head coach, Marco Sturm. I've been pretty impressed with him so far. I was very excited about that hire, and I wanted to get your kind of first impressions on Marco Sturm. How quickly do you think he can kind of put his fingerprints on this team and this roster?
Well, the ever optimist in me feels like he can make an early impression and imprint, because something that I think the Bruins actually did quite well is a number of these players that they picked up in the offseason acquisitions. There's connectivity there. There's ties. There's previous knowledge of one another or playing in similar systems. So half the feat with getting a new team going is, where's the chemistry going to start to spark? Where are these guys going to start being able to get these reads and just intuitively play hockey? And I feel like between the system that Marco Sturm was a part of when it came to the farm team for the LA Kings and the interconnectivity of former players, it's going to be able to pick up a little bit quicker. And at least that's the hopes here. So you've got Arvidsson, who comes out of an LA system, actually one of his best record career, power play numbers and so on and so forth. That's LA. And that's a system that Marco's familiar with. Then you've got a Tanner Jeannot, who, we always talk about his best season being with the Nashville Predators. Well, again, there's a little crossover there. Arvidsson was at the Nashville Predators as Tanner Jeannot was coming in. Then you look at the fact that Tanner Jeannot and Mikey Eyssimont played together in Tampa Bay. Not on the same line all the time, but occasionally on the same line. Not to mention is that you got a Tanner Jeannot that assisted a Mikey Eyssimont, who is just like a pest when it comes to taking charges at the net. So some of these interconnections you're hoping is going to spark chemistry a little bit faster, help everyone get acclimated into who I'm thinking is going to be a little bit of a different system, more of a hybrid system to really compete against the new landscape of the NHL.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I had not thought about all those connections before. I mean, a lot of people have been critical of Don Sweeney on July 1st and for some of these moves, but when you start to connect those dots and look at that former chemistry or connections, it might hopefully pay off in some ways. I am excited about Victor Arvidsson. Not quite sure yet if he's like a guy they're going to rely on this season or a guy that they plan to flip at the trade deadline, maybe if they're looking to do something similar to what they did this past trade deadline. I guess we'll see about that. But in terms of the overall signings on July 1st, like I said, people were kind of underwhelmed that they didn't go after a bigger piece per se, but maybe with all these connections, there could be something there. Do you think that they should have tried to get a bigger fish in free agency, or what they did should be able to raise the talent level with all the guys that were injured coming back? What are your thoughts on the free agent haul or lack of?
I think I understand the fan frustration. When you know where the money lied, what the spacing was, and then you're hearing these big names being kicked around, then like, of course, there's going to be a little bit of disappointment to not go out for the big fish. Because when you have a guy who, without any question, can be a 30-plus goal scorer, of course, it's going to make you feel more confident about the direction of your hockey club. But we got to remember there's two sides to every conversation, and with the Bruins kind of re-identifying themselves, those bigger names may have, been looking for more money that they were able to negotiate at other clubs for longer terms. Term is becoming a big thing for a number of these free agent players that are discussing large numbers. So again, understand the frustration, but considering we don't know the other side of the conversation, this is where we landed. Now, like I said, I understand I'm coming at the over-optimistic perspective. There is a reality there to all of it. You didn't really bring in heavy goal scorers. So where you felt like, okay, last year, maybe when Sacco took over, this team was a little bit more defensively sound. They went 7-10 out the gate when Sacco took over. But it was more so low scoring affairs. And then every once in a while they pop off with 6 goals, and you want to see that goal consistency a lot more. So that is where the fear comes in moving forward. Did you really grab a big goal scorer? Well, no, but I think that that's where the Arvidsson signing comes in, and the trade of that actually is really good value. And I think most fans and other analysts agree with that. So back to the familiarity of system. You're talking about his best numbers being in an LA Kings system that you would think to some degree is going to be adopted here in Boston. So if that being the case, and if Casey Mittelstadt can take that next step, right now the projected second line is Zacha, Mittelstadt, and Arvidsson. Well, the last time Arvidsson played alongside a good skater and a playmaker, he was a 30-goal guy. I mean, he has 2 30-goal seasons under his belt. And so not only in the even strength category can he help find the back of the net, but then we had no power play last season. And that is something else that you have to edge out competition wise, and vice versa. There's question marks around Casey Mittelstadt, but he also needs a skater that can go toe to toe for him. He doesn't ever stop moving his feet when he gets in the offensive zone, and that's not an easy thing to keep up with. So sometimes lanes that he's seeing, they're not being connected or matched on the other side. So the hope is that Arvidsson and a Mittelstadt can kind of resurge each other in a sense and kind of get that second degree playmaking going. And I think it can happen. Training camp's going to be a big if on that.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think Casey Mittelstadt could be one of the more important players for the Bruins this coming season. He had a down year, but the previous 2 seasons in Colorado, he averaged like 58 points. So if he can and that was like what 2 seasons ago, the Bruins got those kind of numbers from Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, like career highs from them. So if he can kind of replicate that, obviously that's going to be huge for the Bruins. He could be a real X factor, I think. I guess either way, the Bruins are kind of well set up for next summer because they either are good enough to attract maybe one of the big free agents who will be available next summer, or if they're back in the same position, they could challenge or be in a lottery position to get like a Gavin McKenna. So maybe it's a win-win either way. Speaking of the draft, James Hagens, so thrilled that he dropped to number 7.
Oh yeah.
I think I saw last night he was at the Happy Gilmore 2 premiere, thanking Adam Sandler for
drafting.
Yeah, like he had a say in it. But
yeah,
they're still like, people are pretty sure he's going to go back to college, but it's still not really definite either way. What are your thoughts on kind of what is the best play for the Bruins and James Hagens? Should he go pro or go back to college for another year of seasoning at the NCAA level and maybe turn pro like in April kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I know a lot of fans, especially because, the off-season moves weren't as flashy or sexy as they wanted. So at this point, some people are like, just go ahead and bring up Hagens.
Yeah.
I argue one more year at BC and let's see him in April. And I argue that for a number of reasons. For one, looking at the projected lineups, where's Hagens going to go right now? You don't want a player that talented coming in on your bottom 6 because those are going to be completely different reps. It can kind of change the formulation of his game. And like when Hagens puts on that B sweater, you want the slot machine that he has been in BC and for U18 Worlds. So I look forward to what he can do without a Ryan Leonard being at Boston College. We've seen him tear up the ice at U18 alongside Teddy Stiga, which, I mean, the way that they've set each other up, the different ways that they've played into each other's strong suits, like him getting to do that for another year, I think would be fantastic. And then also college hockey is changing. This is going to be an insane jump off for where college hockey is heading. Now that CHL players can come in and declare D1 hockey as of August 1st, we've already seen the mini commits, a number of guys getting drafted. They're not going to the farm teams of their hockey club. They're going to college. And that's to tell you how much more competitive college hockey is going to be, which means it's going to be a good test for James Hagens to take the next step in terms of being a leader, putting on a little bit more size, and then coming in feeling that much more prepared. I mean, BC's hockey schedule, or at least what it's predicted to be, last year they opened up versus Michigan State, a complete terror and contenders. So I feel like he's going to get some really strong reps in at college, come up at a good time with more confidence. And I feel like that's going to be a better, let's say, tester for him than to come up, do a couple games, maybe a few, and then go down to Providence, or by any chance, again, working in on that bottom six. This is a guy you drafted in the first round to play top minutes and potentially be on your top line eventually. And with the trade deadline this coming year, and like you said, the future, you want that future to include James Hagens on the top line, if not the second line, and stepping into the role that you brought him in to be.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're going to give a younger center a shot, probably Matt Patra is more well-suited to make the jump to that full-time spot on the NHL roster. It's funny you mentioned Michigan State. Looks like Porter Martone, who is selected one spot ahead of Hagens, is going to be going there this upcoming season, which is bad news for the Brampton Steelheads of the OHL. But again, there's going to be a lot of good competition, guys on the same level as him, and a good opportunity for him to grow his game back at BC. Another big kind of, not debate among Bruins fans right now, but a point of conversation is the captaincy. And I found it interesting when the Bruins unveiled their new jerseys that they had A's on both Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak, probably the two most logical choices to be the next captain. Do you have a sense of which way they should go there? I've seen a lot of people suggest maybe don't name a captain for this season, see how it plays out. I'm pretty set myself on giving David Pastrnak the C. I think he's really stepped up, and in my mind, he's kind of under promoted by the NHL, which is a whole different discussion. But who do you think should be wearing the C? I think both of them at some point in their careers will wear the C, but who's the guy now, do you think?
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because in terms of like being on the ground to chat with these guys a little bit further to say like, oh, this feels like it can lean in this direction or this direction. I couldn't really say. I would jump off the page and say that I've heard a lot more push towards McAvoy. And that's not from like ears to the ground with the Bruins. It's just in terms of like fan reactions and some of the other reporters. Pasta, of course, has become more vocal. We saw him take, like longer press conferences and stuff. So he actually mentioned that towards the end of the season. I am not against going into the season without a captain. And I say that because Marco Sturm kind of mentioned the fact that like he needs to get to know the guys himself. And wherever he wants this ship to go, he's got to make sure that him and his captain are going to be lockstep. And like, you never know which voice that can be. And I think this locker room needs to figure out their identity first. Because kind of touching back to that Steven Stamkos conversation, I was still covering the Lightning, and I remember that it was an obvious choice that it's going to be Victor Hedman. Well, Victor Hedman has a completely different leadership style. So you can have a softer spoken leader if you've got louder voices and support around that. If you don't have that, then your leader really does have to be vocal and be able to light a fire under you and, rump up the locker room in those tough moments. And we felt a deflation in that. Not to say Steven Stamkos wasn't a great vocal leader. He knew how to speak to each individual specifically, but it was a Pat Maroon or an Alex Killorn that like lit a fire under your ass and was like, let's do this. So I think that is what we kind of saw towards the end of the season. That loud voice wasn't particularly there after Marchand left, and it's going to probably take some time to find that now. I say all of this to say, I think Zadorov is a fantastic leader.
I was just going to mention him, actually.
Yeah, he's super blunt, and a really good friend of mine, her husband actually played with him in Colorado, and he has a way to individualize his conversations with his teammates, and he cares so much. But I think that blunt direction, that's one of those loud voices that you're going to need sometimes. So I don't say that in terms of him being a captain, but like maybe that's a guy who could potentially wear an A on his chest and be that voice that supports the next captain. I just think it's going to take time, and it's going to start with what is this team's identity with Marco Sturm at the helm, and like how they're going to be, because they're going to also give young guys a voice and an opportunity and a little bit more rope than we've seen beforehand.
Right. Yeah, I was going to mention Zadorov and Elias Lindholm. I've really been thinking about this a lot in terms of kind of them coming in last season as new guys with long-term commitments, but with this leadership group that was already pre-existing. And I think we saw kind of after Charlie Coyle was moved out, Brandon Carlo, Brad Marchand, you saw those guys specifically kind of step up and take more ownership in terms of being Boston Bruins. Zadorov was very vocal. You saw Lindholm kind of improve on the ice, maybe not as vocal off the ice. But I think kind of that, I don't want to say removal of those guys, but those guys moving out allowed them to kind of step up and be kind of those, because they're going to be here for a long time, probably. And the fact that they can now have more of a voice and establish themselves as leaders should help this team kind of hit the ground running a bit better this coming season.
Yeah. And they're not feel like they're stepping on anyone's toes. So
exactly.
I feel like the revamping can open a lot of opportunities. I mean, fans just have to be open to the fact that things are about to look very different. And once you get okay with that, then everything else that falls into place, it's not going to be as jarring.
For sure. Yeah, I think there was just so many bad ingredients in the soup last year. Looking forward, do you think these Bruins could be any better than they were last season? There's not really anywhere else to go downwards in the Eastern Conference, but do you think they're going to be better, like a wild card contender? If so, why? If not, what's going to hold them back, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think they'll take a step forward, because then one of the other themes that went around the guys that they picked up this offseason was just kind of re-solidifying that killer Bruins defense. And like, I think, of course, no one expected last season to turn out the way that it did, but we also forget, like, you didn't have your top D pairing functioning together for 60, 70, 80% of the season. And when your defense is falling apart in front of your goaltender who wasn't part of training camp, there's just so many factors that really kept this team from playing their best hockey as much as possible. And kind of touching back on my previous experience, Vasilevsky was one of the best goalies in the league. But when he didn't have a Ryan McDonough in front of him and a Luke Shin, and when the defensive pairings changed in front of him, it changed his game a little bit. The communication style changes when your defensemen change. Braden Coburn talked to me about that once back in Tampa. You have to change your terms, you have to make them shorter, and you're doing all this so quickly. So there was just too many moving pieces for there to be a stout defense in front of Swayman. And so I think those small changes are going to elevate this roster from the jump off. Then insert, the third and fourth line. Okay, high investments in the third and fourth line, and that's very frustrating. But when you look at the past 5 Stanley Cup contenders or Stanley Cup champions, everything came into play because of that third and fourth line. So now you're talking about a third and fourth line. They're going to be a lot more irritating to play against. And locking in on that third line for a second, if it is the projection right now of Tanner Jeannot, Fraser Mitten, and maybe Blumel, Patra, if he decides or if he's able to kind of function at that winger position the way that they need him to, you're looking at a pretty insane third line to play against. Tanner Jeannot knows his role between the physicality and creating space. He's talked about it on NHL Network and when he first got over to Boston. And then you got a Fraser Mitten who, maybe I'm putting too much stock behind the kid, but I mean, his numbers speak for themselves. He's a true two-way center. He's got size on him at 6'2". He's really annoying with a net front presence, but more importantly, I think that he'll play well alongside a Tanner Jeannot who's creating space. And then if it does end up being Blumel, that's a guy who's got insane numbers and Geeky's left shot playing at right wing. So you're talking about getting these crazy angles and working through traffic in a way that's really hard to defend. And so there's hope there. And the new pieces that they moved around from everything that was just a question mark last year.
Yep.
Then if an Arvidsson can get you 20 goals, that helps. If a Geeky, I almost said Connor, Morgan Geeky.
Yeah.
I had the other Geeky.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Can give you 20 plus goals and pasta be pasta. It's hard to look at, but there are glimmers of hope. And like you said, you can't really go down from last year. So health being on their side, the buy-in being there, and the acclimation of a potential new system, whatever that might look like for Sturm, I think you're going to at least pick up 10 plus more wins.
Yeah.
It's going to put you in a more competitive spot.
Yeah. I love so much of what you just said. A couple of things that jump out to me. I'm big on Fraser Minton, and for all the hate that Don Sweeney gets, the work that he did at the trade deadline was pretty unbelievable when you think about what he got for Charlie Coyle, what he got for Brandon Carlo, Marsh on the side. You talk about like the third line success. He was a third liner for the Panthers in the playoffs, and we saw how important he was for them. I love Connor Geeky and Morgan Geeky. Side note, my keeper fantasy hockey teams, I have both of those guys, and I just renamed them Geeky Blinders for this upcoming season. So I'm excited.
That's amazing. I love that.
Connor step up. I think he's going to have a nice breakout season for Tampa. Finally, you see like often a connection between like a new coach coming in and succeeding because of the goaltending. This might be like glass 80% full kind of viewpoint, but I can really see a situation where Jeremy Swayman gets back to form, the Bruins are back in the playoffs, and as a result, Marco Sturm is like a Jack Adams finalist. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Maybe that's really black and gold covered glasses, but that's my one of my bold predictions for next season anyways.
Hey, we had Nate Thompson on the Hockey Hub a couple weeks ago, and he said that the Bruins, even after the offseason moves, can go back to the playoffs. And you're talking about a guy that drafted by the Bruins, played for the Bruins, played for Tampa, worked alongside Marco Sturm, played with and for Marco Sturm. So, like, again, if you're okay with leaning into a little positivity, it is not far out of reach. And, like, the other thing I look at is the future is bright. So whatever happens this year, it's giving a team time to kind of acclimatize around their new identity, and re-identifying an original six team. That's hard. And I don't think the Bruins are in as bad of a position as, let's say, the Red Wings were, or the Blackhawks were, and maybe still are. So like to carry that original six badge and to start getting into a modernized NHL, it's a tough task to do. And I think the Bruins are taking, cautious but correct steps in that direction to do so. And I think the future is bright because you mentioned the trade deadline. Will Zeller's, excited for him to get situated. And then another draft pick that they just picked up, Cooper Simpson. He's going to be playing with Zellers at North Dakota.
Right.
In Zellers, Middlestat, all Minnesota boys. So it goes back to like the connectivity and the ties.
Right.
Looking 2 years down the stretch here, Will Moore is going to be playing with a Hagens at BC. Chemistry of some sort is going to be building and brewing. And you're talking about a lot of talent that I think that the Bruins picked up in this draft that can be a part of this team in the next 3 to 5 years. So hope really isn't too far off. It's the patience that's the hard part.
Yeah, I don't think we're looking at Buffalo Sabres kind of 14 years out of the playoffs kind of situation, thankfully.
No. I think the Sabres are the Sabres. And
for sure. They're a special kind of hockey team for sure. Kasey, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat. Before I let you go, I always like to end with kind of a different topic, look at some pop culture stuff. What are you watching or reading or listening to away from hockey? Anything that you can recommend that people need to check out?
Ooh, yes. Okay. I harassed everyone at NESN about watching Mobland. So you mentioned Peaky Blinders. Yeah. If you're a Tom Hardy fan, Mobland is a must. You got Pierce Bronson, Tom Hardy, Helen Mirren, I think her name is.
Yeah.
The cast is fantastic.
Yeah, that's on my list.
Yeah, that one sucked me in right off the jump. So big fan of that. I'm actually rewatching Ted Lasso right now because they were leaking the season 4 being recorded, and I loved Ted Lasso because I actually played soccer growing up. That was another thing that helped me learn hockey pretty quickly, was some of the ties between soccer and hockey, funny enough. Let's see other pop culture stuff. I just went to Thomas Rhett this past weekend at Fenway. The
Yeah,
concert
a
at
lot of
Fenway by
stories
any
from that.
means. Bucket list. That was so sick. And then I'll be doing Morgan Wallen at the end of August. But other than that, it's keeping up with storylines in the off season. It's all the coverage that we've got going on at NESN. I'm still getting acclimated in Boston because I got here January,
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to learn all the things of the New England summer, but it's been amazing. I mean, I've loved Boston since I was a kid. I wanted to play soccer at either BC or BU when I was younger, and being a full circle moment, being able to come here and join the NESN family.
Very cool. And speaking of that, where can people find all your NESN related coverage? Anything else you're doing? Where can people find you online?
All the NESN stuff. Yeah, I do the Hockey Hub with Sophia, our Bruins reporter and host, and that's been really cool and fun. And it's been awesome to get to know everyone on the Bruins talent side. I mean, Brick's probably one of my favorites. I got to chat with him the most when I first got here, and everybody knows and loves Sophia and Razor. I got to work with Razor on Unobstructed Views and Bergie as well. So yeah, the Hockey Hub, it's on twice a week, Monday and Wednesday at 10 a.m. And then I also do Boston's End of the Chat, where we do all the Boston sports. Of course, probably pretty Red Sox heavy right now, but I get to do that with Travis Thomas and George Bellecci, and that's 8 a.m. Monday through Friday. And then outside of that, what my other hockey work is, I'm actually an analyst with CBS Sports. So once we get closer to the season and training camp and college and stuff, then I'll be back popping on as an analyst for CBS.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm actually up here in Ontario, so I have been a huge fan of Sophia since she was up here in Canada working on the score. And I was so happy when she was hired as the NESN reporter. She's doing such a great job. Brick was on the podcast a few weeks ago. If people haven't listened to that, go back, because he was I just loved him so much. He was so great. And this has been so great as well. Kasey, thank you so much for taking the time. Hopefully we can get you on again, maybe as the season gets closer and as we get into things. Thank you so much again. And have a great rest of the summer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And anytime. Anytime.
Thanks so much. Oh my goodness, what a great chat that was with Kasey Hudson of NESN. Please do subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins if you have not already. Check out the Locked On NHL podcast next. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Follow Kasey on social media and all of her stuff over at NESN. And we'll be back tomorrow with a fresh episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.